Sarah Martinez walked through the school hallways with her head down, clutching her books tightly against her chest. At 17, she had perfected the art of being invisible. Her long sleeves covered the fading bruises on her arms, and her carefully styled hair hid the small scar above her left eyebrow. To everyone at Lincoln High School, she was just the quiet girl who sat in the back of every classroom and never caused trouble. Her classmates whispered about her sometimes. They called her weird for always wearing long sleeves, even on the hottest days. They wondered why she flinched when someone raised their voice or moved too quickly near her. But Sarah had learned that being noticed meant danger, so she kept her secrets buried deep inside. Mrs. Chen, her English teacher, often watched Sarah with concern. She noticed how the girl jumped at sudden sounds, and how she always chose seats near the door, as if ready to run. When other students complained about their parents being too strict, Sarah stayed silent. When they talked about weekend plans and family dinners, she looked out the window with empty eyes. The truth was that Sarah's home was a battlefield, and she had been fighting a war that nobody could see. Her stepfather, Marcus, had moved in when she was 12. At first, he seemed nice enough, bringing flowers for her mother and taking them out for dinner. But behind closed doors, Marcus was a different person entirely. It started with harsh words and cruel jokes. Marcus would mock Sarah's appearance, telling her she was too skinny, too ugly, too stupid. Her mother, Lisa, was so desperate to keep a man in her life that she pretended not to hear the verbal attacks. When Sarah tried to tell her mother what was happening, Lisa accused her of being jealous and trying to ruin her happiness. The emotional abuse slowly escalated to physical violence. A hard slap for talking back. A painful grip on her arm for not cleaning the kitchen properly. A push down the stairs that Marcus claimed was an accident. Each incident was followed by apologies and promises that it would never happen again, but the violence only grew worse with time. Sarah learned to read Marcus's moods like a survival guide. She knew when his jaw tightened that she needed to disappear into her room. She recognized the dangerous glint in his eyes when he had been drinking. She memorized which floorboards creaked so she could move silently through the house at night. At school, she built walls around herself. When her friend Jessica tried to invite her to sleepovers, Sarah made up excuses. When teachers asked about her bruises, she had stories ready about falling down or bumping into doors. She became an expert liar, not because she wanted to, but because the truth felt too dangerous to share. The other students at Lincoln High had no idea what Sarah endured at home. They saw her as the girl who never spoke up in class, never joined clubs, and never seemed to have fun. They couldn't imagine that behind her quiet exterior was someone who had developed incredible strength just to survive each day. During lunch breaks, Sarah often sat alone in the library, reading books about brave characters who overcame impossible challenges. She wondered if she would ever be that strong, ever be able to stand up for herself the way heroes did in stories. The librarian, Mr. Rodriguez, sometimes recommended books to her, and he never asked questions when he noticed her wiping away tears while reading. At home, the situation continued to worsen. Marcus's anger seemed to have no limits, and her mother's denial grew stronger with each passing month. Sarah began to believe that this was her life forever, that she was destined to be a victim, someone who would never be strong enough to fight back. She developed coping mechanisms that helped her survive. She learned to control her breathing during the worst moments, to disconnect her mind from her body when the pain became too much. She discovered that she could endure more than she ever thought possible, but she didn't recognize this as strength. To her, it felt like weakness, like she was somehow failing by not being able to make the abuse stop. The scars on Sarah's body told stories that she had never shared with anyone. The small burn mark on her shoulder from when Marcus pressed a hot iron against her skin. The permanent dent in her ribs from being kicked down the basement stairs. The way her left wrist sometimes ached from being twisted too hard. Each mark was evidence of battles she had fought alone, victories of survival that nobody celebrated because nobody knew they had happened. As her senior year approached, Sarah felt trapped between two impossible choices. She could stay and continue enduring the abuse, or she could try to leave and risk even greater danger. Marcus had made it clear that if she ever tried to tell anyone or run away, the consequences would be severe. He had shown her news articles about missing girls and made sure she understood the message, but something inside Sarah was beginning to change. The quiet girl who had learned to survive in silence was starting to feel a small flame of anger burning in her chest. She was tired of being afraid, tired of living like a prisoner in her own home. She didn't know it yet, but this anger would become the fuel for a transformation that would shock everyone who thought they knew her. The students and teachers at Lincoln High School continued to see Sarah as the fragile, timid girl who never fought back against anything. They had no idea that every day she survived was proof of an inner strength they couldn't imagine. They couldn't see that behind her quiet demeanor was someone who had been forged in fire, someone who had learned to endure the unendurable. Sarah's story was far from over, and the battles that had shaped her in secret were about to prepare her for a fight that would change everything. The girl they thought was weak was about to show them what real strength looked like, but first, she had to discover it within herself. The night that changed everything started like any other. Sarah was washing dishes in the kitchen, while her mother worked a late shift at the diner. The house felt heavy with the familiar tension that always came when she and Marcus were alone together. She could hear him in the living room, drinking beer and watching television, his voice growing louder and angrier with each passing hour. Sarah tried to finish her chores quietly, hoping to slip upstairs to her room unnoticed. But as she reached for a glass on the high shelf, it slipped from her wet hands and crashed to the floor. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot, and Sarah's heart immediately began racing. She knew what was coming. Marcus appeared in the doorway within seconds, his face twisted with rage. The smell of alcohol on his breath mixed with the familiar scent of cigarettes and sweat. His eyes had that dangerous look that Sarah had learned to fear more than anything else in the world. "You stupid little bitch," he snarled, stepping closer. "Can't you do anything right? Your mother works her ass off to keep this house running, and you can't even wash dishes without breaking them." Sarah dropped to her knees and began picking up the broken glass with shaking hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words automatic after years of practice. "It was an accident. I'll clean it up." But Marcus wasn't interested in apologies tonight. He grabbed her by the hair and yanked her to her feet, causing several pieces of glass to cut into her palms as she instinctively reached out to break her fall. The pain was sharp and immediate. But Sarah had learned long ago not to cry out when he hurt her. "Sorry doesn't fix anything," Marcus growled, his grip on her hair tightening. "Maybe it's time you learned some real consequences for your mistakes." What happened next was worse than anything Sarah had endured before. Marcus's rage seemed to have no boundaries that night. And for the first time, Sarah truly believed she might not survive. He threw her against the kitchen counter with such force that she felt something crack in her ribs. When she tried to crawl away, he kicked her in the stomach, doubling her over in agony. But as Marcus raised his fist for another blow, something extraordinary happened inside Sarah's mind. Instead of the usual fog of fear and helplessness that consumed her during these attacks, she felt a sudden clarity. She saw herself from outside her body, saw a 17-year-old girl who had endured years of torture, who had survived countless battles that would have broken most people. In that moment, Sarah realized that she wasn't weak at all. Every day she had chosen to keep living, despite the pain, was an act of incredible courage. Every night she had fallen asleep planning to face another day was proof of her strength. Every time she had protected herself as best she could was evidence of a fighter's spirit that had never been defeated. The rage that had been building inside her for years suddenly exploded outward. As Marcus reached for her again, Sarah moved with a speed and precision that surprised them both. Years of dodging his attacks had taught her to read his movements, to anticipate his actions. She grabbed the cast-iron pan from the stove and swung it with all the strength she had been hiding for so long. The pan connected with Marcus's temple with a sound that Sarah would remember for the rest of her life. He stumbled backward, shock replacing the anger on his face. For the first time in 5 years, Sarah saw fear in his eyes, and she realized that he had never expected her to fight back. "Stay away from me," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Don't ever touch me again." Marcus recovered from his shock quickly, his face darkening with a rage that was even more dangerous than before. "You little psycho," he spat, blood trickling from the cut on his head. "You have no idea what you just started." He lunged toward her, but this time Sarah was ready. She had spent years learning to move quickly and quietly through the house. She knew every corner, every piece of furniture, every potential weapon or hiding place. When Marcus charged at her, she sidestepped him easily, causing him to crash into the kitchen table. The fight that followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. For years, she had been a passive victim, enduring Marcus's attacks without fighting back. But now, all the survival skills she had developed, all the pain she had absorbed, all the strength she had built just to stay alive, focused into pure determination. She threw everything she had learned about Marcus back at him. She knew he was slower when he had been drinking. She knew his bad knee made him vulnerable if she could get him off balance. She knew exactly which words would make him lose control of his temper and make mistakes. The battle raged through the kitchen and into the living room. Sarah used furniture as shields and weapons, staying one step ahead of Marcus's increasingly desperate attacks. She was no longer the scared little girl who flinched at raised voices. She was someone who had been forged in the fires of abuse and had emerged as a survivor. When Marcus finally cornered her near the front door, Sarah made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Instead of trying to escape, she stood her ground. She looked him directly in the eyes and spoke with a voice that carried the weight of every battle she had fought in silence. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. "I've been fighting you for 5 years. I've survived everything you've done to me. And now, I'm done hiding." Marcus swung at her one final time, but Sarah caught his wrist with reflexes sharpened by years of defending herself. She twisted his arm with a technique she had learned from watching self-defense videos on her phone late at night, when she dreamed of being strong enough to protect herself. The sound of Marcus's shoulder popping out of joint filled the room. He screamed in pain and dropped to his knees, finally understanding that the girl he had tormented for so long was no longer his victim. Sarah stood over him, breathing heavily, her body shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. Blood from her cut palms dripped onto the floor, mixing with the sweat and tears that marked this moment of transformation. She had discovered something about herself that night that would change everything. She was not the weak, helpless girl that everyone believed her to be. She was a fighter who had been training for this moment, without even knowing it. Every survival strategy she had developed, every hit she had endured, every day she had chosen to keep living, had prepared her for this fight. As sirens wailed in the distance, someone having called the police after hearing the commotion, Sarah realized that her secret war was about to become visible to the world. The battle marks she had hidden for so long were about to tell their story, and everyone who thought they knew her was about to discover who she really was. The quiet girl from Lincoln High School was gone forever. In her place stood someone who had faced her demons and won. Someone who had found her strength in the darkest possible circumstances. The real fight was just beginning, but for the first time in years, Sarah knew she was strong enough to win. The emergency room at County General Hospital buzzed with activity as Sarah sat on the examination table, her hands carefully bandaged and her ribs wrapped. The police officers had insisted she get medical attention after they found Marcus unconscious on her living room floor. What they discovered during that examination changed everything. Dr. Patricia Williams had been working in emergency medicine for 15 years, but she had never seen anything quite like Sarah's case. As she carefully documented each injury, she realized she was looking at a roadmap of long-term abuse. The old scars, the healed fractures, the carefully hidden evidence of years of violence told a story that made the doctor's hands shake with anger. "Sarah," Dr. Williams said gently. sitting down beside the examination table. "Some of these injuries are very old. The scar tissue on your ribs suggests you've had several fractures over the past few years. Can you tell me how this happened?" For a moment, Sarah remained silent, the habit of keeping secrets still strong after so many years. But as she looked at the doctor's kind face, she realized that the time for hiding was over. The fight with Marcus had changed something fundamental inside her. She was no longer afraid of the truth. "My stepfather has been hurting me for 5 years," Sarah said quietly. "Tonight was the first time I fought back." The words hung in the air like a confession that had been waiting years to be spoken. Dr. Williams nodded with understanding, having suspected as much from the evidence written across Sarah's body. Within hours, the story began to spread beyond the hospital walls. Detective Maria Santos, who had been investigating domestic violence cases for a decade, was called in to interview Sarah. What she heard made her realize that this case was extraordinary, not because of the violence, but because of the incredible strength the young woman had shown in surviving it. The next morning at Lincoln High School, news of what had happened traveled through the hallways like wildfire. Students who had known Sarah for years struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, timid girl they remembered with the news reports of someone who had fought back against an adult attacker and won. Jessica Martinez, who had been trying to befriend Sarah since middle school, sat in her first period class with tears streaming down her face. "I should have known," she kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "I should have seen the signs." She was always so careful about her clothes, always covering up. "I thought she was just shy." Mrs. Chen, Sarah's English teacher, called an emergency meeting with the school counselors and administrators. As she shared her observations about Sarah's behavior over the years, a picture emerged of a student who had been crying out for help in ways that no one had recognized. She wrote about warriors and survivors in every essay assignment, Mrs. Chen explained. Her poetry was always about people finding strength in dark places. "I thought she just had a vivid imagination. I never realized she was writing about her own life." The school nurse, Miss Rodriguez, reviewed her files and found dozens of incidents where Sarah had come to her office with injuries that she had explained away as accidents. The pattern was clear in hindsight, but at the time, Sarah had been so convincing in her explanations that no one had questioned them. As news of Sarah's story spread throughout the community, people began to understand that they had been witnessing something remarkable without recognizing it. The girl they had dismissed as weak and fragile had actually been demonstrating incredible courage every single day. Officer Jenkins, who had responded to the domestic disturbance call, found himself deeply affected by the case. In his 20 years of police work, he had seen many victims of domestic violence, but he had never encountered someone who had endured so much for so long, while maintaining the strength to continue living a normal life in public. "She went to school every day," he told his partner over coffee the next morning. "She did her homework, participated in class, never caused any trouble, all while going home to that nightmare every night. That takes a kind of strength that most people can't even imagine." The physical evidence of Sarah's battles became impossible to ignore once medical professionals began documenting it properly. X-rays revealed old fractures in her wrist, ribs, and collarbone that had healed without proper medical attention. Scars that she had hidden beneath makeup and clothing told stories of injuries that would have sent most people to the hospital. Dr. Williams prepared a comprehensive report that detailed not just the recent injuries from the fight with Marcus, but the historical evidence of prolonged abuse. The document painted a picture of someone who had survived systematic torture while somehow maintaining her sanity and her will to live. When Sarah's mother, Lisa, finally arrived at the hospital after her shift at the diner ended, she found herself face to face with a truth she had been avoiding for years. The sight of her daughter's documented injuries, the medical reports, and the testimony of witnesses made denial impossible. "I knew," Lisa whispered as she sat in the hospital waiting room, her hands covering her face. "Deep down, I knew what he was doing to her. But I was so afraid of being alone again. I convinced myself that it wasn't as bad as I thought, that she was exaggerating." The revelation of Sarah's story sent shockwaves through the community, but it also inspired something unexpected. Students at Lincoln High School began organizing support groups for others who might be hiding similar secrets. Teachers received training on recognizing signs of abuse. The school implemented new programs designed to create safe spaces for students to seek help. Local domestic violence shelters reported an increase in calls from people who had been inspired by Sarah's courage to seek help for their own situations. Her story became a catalyst for conversations that had been avoided for too long. Marcus was charged with multiple counts of assault, domestic violence, and child abuse. During his court proceedings, the full extent of what Sarah had endured became public record. The prosecution presented evidence of years of systematic abuse. But they also presented something else: evidence of remarkable resilience and strength. The courtroom was packed when Sarah finally took the witness stand to tell her story in her own words. The girl who had spent years hiding in the back of classrooms now spoke clearly and confidently about her experiences, her voice steady as she described years of abuse and her eventual decision to fight back. "I want people to understand," she said, looking directly at the jury, "that surviving abuse doesn't make you weak. It makes you a warrior. Every day I chose to keep living was a victory. Every night I went to sleep planning to face another day was an act of rebellion." Her testimony lasted for hours, but not a single person in the courtroom looked away. They were witnessing someone reclaim her narrative, someone who was transforming from a victim into a survivor in real time. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict Marcus on all charges. As he was led away in handcuffs, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for 5 years. The man who had terrorized her was finally facing consequences for his actions. In the months that followed, Sarah's story continued to ripple through the community. She became an advocate for other abuse survivors, speaking at schools and community centers about the importance of recognizing that strength comes in many forms. She graduated from Lincoln High School as valedictorian, her speech focusing on the idea that everyone is fighting battles that others cannot see, and that true strength is often hidden in plain sight. The quiet girl who had once believed she was weak had discovered that she was one of the strongest people anyone knew. Her battle marks, once hidden in shame, became symbols of survival and courage. She had fought a war that no one else could see, and had emerged victorious, proving that sometimes the greatest warriors are the ones whose battles remain invisible until the moment they choose to stand up and show the world who they really are. Sarah's story became a reminder that strength is not always loud and obvious. Sometimes it whispers in the choice to survive another day, in the decision to keep hoping when hope seems impossible, and in the courage to finally fight back when fighting back seems like the only option left.